Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Ramey. I'm a battalion chief with CAL FIRE out of the Humboldt Del Norte unit. One of my responsibilities is the Vegetation Management Program Coordinator. And today I'd like to talk to you about our vegetation management program and some other prescribed fire options that are available to you as land managers. The Vegetation Management Program is derived from Senate Bill 1704, authored by then Senator Barry Keene, and ultimately signed by Governor Edmund Brown on July 16, 1980. The CHAPARRAL Management Program Environmental Impact Report is what it was originally called. The term CHAPARRAL management was chosen by the governor's office. It's meant to include all shrub formations of all types. And the program focuses on prescribed fire as the major tool for this management. It was certified in 1981. So all the environmental analysis and documentation associated with the VMP is tiered to this CHAPARRAL management programmatic EIR. And this is one reason that I don't have to go and completely rewrite an entire vegetation management plan for every project that we want to do. Currently, the EIR only addresses potential impacts of prescribed fire to chaparral, grassland, and oak woodland landscapes. Grasslands must somehow be associated with chaparral in the past, present, or future. The new Cal VTP EIR should be addressing impacts to all wildlands, including timberland, and impacts from the use of herbicides. So VMPs are a significant amount of field work and paperwork. Typically, archaeological review is the most time-consuming. The VMP coordinator, myself, must be very familiar with the ground on which we're evaluating, and we need to map the area, illustrate roads, decide on burn units, identify water courses, look at vegetation types or any sensitive species or wildlife species, unstable areas, safety concerns, a lot. It's very similar to writing a timber harvest plan. The contents of our vegetation management plan include a standard agreement, cost analysis, a burn plan, behave printouts, which is fire behavior calculations, a litany of maps, usually a California Natural Diversity Database review and run. We develop a smoke management plan, soil survey, erosion hazard rating. We look at the potential for damage by fire and types of, intensity of fire. We refer the project to each of our other agencies like CDFW, CGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Water Quality, etc. And then we do create a confidential archaeological addendum. So as you can see, it does have very similar, it's very similarly aligned to a timber harvest plan. When we go to conduct the burn, there are a litany of forms and actions required by CAL FIRE after the submittal and approval of the VMP. We have pre-burn preparations and assignments. We develop an IAP, incident action plan. We do the resource scheduling, weather and smoke management forecasts, news release and dissemination so that the public is aware of what we're doing. We do a very specific project go, no-go checklist. We have a live fire use form. The list goes on for actual burn day preparations. So the broad goals of our vegetation management program is the reduction of large damaging conflagration fires. 2, optimization of soil and water productivity. protection and improvement of intrinsic floral and faunal values. Typically, when we're approaching these projects, we're trying to figure out, how can we reduce the amount of hazardous fire fuels, and what are the objectives of the landowner. There might be a certain species that we're trying to target, so we may need to think about burning a certain time of the year. The overall goal for CAL FIRE is to reduce hazardous fire fuels, but we work with the landowner to figure out what their objectives are so that both parties can benefit. Some of the sub-goals of our vegetation management program are to increase public safety, reduce fire suppression costs, increase water quality and quantity, decrease potential for flooding and siltation, improve soil productivity and decrease erosion, improve wildlife and fisheries habitat, improve oak woodlands, establish and maintain desired plant communities, propagate fire-dependent listed plant species, improve air quality over the long term, which is the reduction in the amount of smoke being produced during a conflagration fire, improve forage and browsing potential for livestock, increase opportunities for recreation and improve scenic vistas, decrease the risk to firefighter and other responders during wildland fires, and provide training opportunities for personnel in incident organization, operations, fire behavior, firing methods, and the overall effects of fire weather influences. So as you can see, the sub-goals are extensive. So theoretically, a project proponent could pursue a VMP project to increase with the objective of meeting all these sub-goals. The VMP is a cost share program, or it was originally intended to be a cost share program. The way we operate in this unit is we try to figure out what the landowner can provide to assist us in our project. Usually we're not going to ask for actual cash. We're typically looking for ways the landowner can provide in-kind match, not money. We can do that. We do that based on an Excel spreadsheet where we analyze the public to private benefit. There's kind of we take a look at the fire hazard reduction value, the water yields, watershed stabilization, wildlife habitat improvement, fisheries habitat improvement, air quality improvement, and range forage improvement, and basically plug it into an Excel spreadsheet that spits out, gives us an idea of what the cost share should be. Usually it's about an 80-20 to a 90-10% share, 90% on the state, 10% on the landowner. The more public benefit provided, the less the landowner will have to provide. For each of these 7 categories, a numerical value is assigned for the public benefit and the private benefit. In-kind match is the best way, and that's usually related to running a piece of equipment. Usually ranchers or landowners or large land managers have some kind of equipment they can provide, or an equipment operator, or a water tender, or a water supply, or providing lunch to firefighters that day, the fuel that we might be using in our drip torches. Recently, last year, CAL FIRE did reduce the cost to landowners to take on 100% of the cost in certain situations. Generally in this unit, because of the interest that's generated these days to getting this type of project work done on a landowner's property, we are kind of looking to see what they have available and can provide to us as in-kind match. Um, the typical process for developing a VMP project, if you have an interested landowner and a landowner who's willing to let the state essentially um, take over a project like this, have them contact the local unit VMP coordinator. Every CAL FIRE administrative unit has somebody who is a VMP coordinator. They can also talk to the local battalion chief within the battalion for the respective battalion that the project resides in. And their schedule a site visit, determine if the project is consistent with the intent of the VMP program. If it is feasible, there should be a project application provided to the landowner. From there, we'll determine initial project boundaries, look at topographic, ownership, and resource protection issues, which could limit the project. Query landowners regarding local knowledge of biological, cultural, or historic resources. Develop a preliminary agreement with the landowner. Usually this is kind of like back of the envelope, like, hey, here's what we can do for you based on what we've seen, and what do you think? Usually before we go down the road of actually signing a written contract, we have a loose agreement in the beginning before we put a lot of staff time into developing the entire vegetation management plan. The VMP coordinator will then initiate the environmental review. So what are some of the advantages of the VMP contract? What good is this for you? Well, the department agrees to indemnify and hold harmless the cooperator against liability for damages of any nature arising out of the performance of the prescribed burning contract. In the same manner, the department agrees to indemnify any cooperating public entity that is entered into a fire protection cooperative agreement. Basically, that means CAL FIRE assumes the liability. Any losses incurred by cooperators will be processed through the State Board of Control. In all matters requiring legal assistance on behalf of the department or cooperators, the State Attorney's General Office will provide counsel. VMP projects are relatively affordable to landowners, sometimes at no cost. VMP contracts are now valid for up to 10 years. Usually the archaeological records check and a biological review will be required after 5 years. But the overarching VMP contract can be good for up to 10 years. So what are the disadvantages of the VMP contract? Well, CAL FIRE's time and resources are limited. It kind of depends on the fire season. Projects are dependent on weather and other factors. There's no guarantee of having an acceptable burn window within the life of the VMP. I think that's with the 10-year contract, that's we're getting a little better. It used to be 3 years. So with 10 years, we're looking at opening those windows of opportunity a little wider. Well, and preparation can be a lengthy process. The landowners have to allow the government to access your property. We need to get on there to do all of these assessments as is required by the California Environmental Quality Act for any public agency that's involved in a project like this. One VMP coordinator in the Humboldt Del Norte unit, a lot of the units, there is really only one or maybe two people assigned to do these projects. And each one of these VMPs can take 6 months or longer just to get onto the shelf. After that 6-month period, then we're looking for burn windows. And, during typically here in the Humboldt Del Norte unit, the fall is the best time for us to burn. And in the fall, while we have a beautiful burn window, other parts of the state are on fire or they're in red flag warnings, and we can't get the okay to commit some of our resources to a fire that we ignite when the fire danger is elevated in other parts of the state. So we could get into a situation where we're telling you, yep, we're a go. And then the next day, nope, we can't go. The following day, we're a go. Next day, nope, we can't go. So that can get a little frustrating on both ends. But, and that's one of the disadvantages. So there are some other options for reducing the wildland vegetation or meeting objectives of land managers. They can take a lot of the onus onto themselves, and there are other programs here that are being talked about during this workshop that can, you know, for landowner assistance. You don't have to, you know, CAL FIRE is not the only tool in the toolbox for getting prescribed fire on the ground. Landowners can conduct broadcast burning projects on their own, traditionally called project type burns. This is a permit called an LE7 that we'll go into a little more. Currently, the liability for this type of burn rests solely on the landowner conducting the burn. So if you sign the permit, you could potentially be held liable for anything that goes wrong. Landowners may choose to apply for participation in the vegetation management program. When approved as a VMP project, CAL FIRE assumes all liability. We've talked about that. Let's go into those permits a little bit more. So an LE5 is typically for non-standard burn piles. The permit holder retains liability for the burn and may be charged for suppression costs and damages caused to the property of others if a burn escapes and is declared a wildfire. You know, the LE5 has very specific, you know, it's a non-discretionary permit. Anybody who wants one, you go in, you check the boxes, you sign it, say that you're going to meet this standard, and you've got yourself a permit. And if you do, you know, your operations exceed, or you mess something up and you don't follow all the components of that permit, well, then you can be held liable. The project type burn allows landowners to conduct control burns on burn days as determined by the local air district when burning is not prohibited. An LE8 is a permit that typically almost always accompanies the LE7 and sets the minimum precautions for project type burning. And essentially, most of the time, almost all the time, our goal with an LE8 is to prevent or set forth the standards or the minimum precautions needed for that landowner to prevent fire from burning onto the lands of another. The LE5 and LE7 are non-discretionary. They do not trigger CEQA as long as you're maintaining a certain level of due diligence and meeting all the elements of that permit. We do not have to do a CEQA review. The permits are required. Well, here's some public resources code for you guys to research. CAL FIRE authority applicable to private prescribed burning, PRC 4491 through 4494. And then PRC 4423, these permits are required from May 1st until the date the director declares by proclamation that the hazardous fire conditions have abated for that year. The date for these fire conditions to be proclaimed abated may be different in CAL FIRE units. The CAL FIRE unit chief responsible for that administrative unit is ultimately the one who decides when burning should be suspended, when you can burn with a permit, and when you don't need a CAL FIRE permit. When applying for an LE7 or an LE8 from a CAL FIRE field battalion chief, you can expect a site visit. Make sure you establish your clear fire control features and consider writing a simple burn plan outlining burn prescriptions, you know, weather conditions, resources that you have at scene. You know, take into account the values and assets at risk, and how you're going to protect those during your burn. And there's a lot more information available on this online. Prescribed fire burn permits during the fire season. Speaking for the Humboldt Del Norte unit, CAL FIRE may provide standby resources if available, meaning engines and crews. These resources may assist with holding operations, but not committed to the burn unless declared a wildfire. So essentially what that means is we'll know that the burn is being conducted. We may send a representative. We may send no one. If we have an engine available and they're not committed to another incident, we might send them out there to attend your morning briefing, as small as it may be, and then be around in the area during the project. Burn permits may be suspended at any time due to adverse weather conditions, adverse burning conditions, statewide incident activity resulting in CAL FIRE resource drawdown. That's a big one for us. We have to dance around. You know, our resources travel all over the state, and there may be times when the weather conditions are great here, but we have no equipment. We are down to our last engine in the unit because of a fire that just kicked off in the Mendocino unit. And the night before your project, we sent every available resource away. And now there's nothing, there's no contingency. You know, we have to consider that before we give you the okay to ignite. A controlled burn that goes across control lines but remains on the landowner's property will not be considered an escape if it can be controlled with resources at scene. So, you know, that's a big point. You know, if you're working with a landowner that has a lot of property and you've specified one specific burn unit, the fire does cross control lines, it's not necessarily an escape right away unless you can control it and feel good about it with the resources you have at scene. And if it's not threatening the property line or burning onto somebody else's property, you got some time to work with it. And then if we happen to be there, we can assist in that corralling of that escape. Well, the not escape, but you know, the bonus acres. Something important to note is that air quality management district permits and smoke management plan is required for any broadcast burning all year round. Here in this unit, we work closely with the North Coast Air Quality Management District. And you know, we're on a first name basis with them and we know what's going on. Typically we're conversing with them quite a bit. While, you know, during the winter and spring period, while it's not required, we still want you to notify the local CAL FIRE station or headquarters to communicate your intentions to burn. If you don't, there's the potential that a CAL FIRE response may be launched because somebody driving on the highway will see smoke, potentially a lot of smoke, and call it in. If you get enough smoke generated, we can get airplanes flying over, FedEx planes, that will call the fire in, and then next thing you know, we've got any available engines heading out to that site. You know, and there's a chance that we take suppression action. So just communicate. Here in the Humboldt Del Norte unit, we are not, we want to leverage our experience and our capabilities to get as much prescribed fire on the ground as safely possible. And I think we're pretty easy to work with. So try not to think of us as adversaries. I think, you know, we're very easy to work with and we want to see you succeed. And so that's how we approach every project is how can we help you meet your objectives within some of the parameters set forth by the PRC and the public. So that concludes my presentation. I'm sure there's going to be questions. Please feel free.